Bereshit means, it's translated in the beginning. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz ve'ha'aretz hayata tohu ve'bohu ve'hosek al panei tehom ve'ruach Elohim merehefet al panei hamayim. Though you don't know what that means, in the beginning of Elohim's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was tohu ve'bohu, which is translated astonishingly empty, which is the debatable translation. There's more to looking into those words. When, with darkness upon the surface of the deep, the Ruach Elohim, it's translated here, the divine presence, hovered. But the word hovered is vibrated, quivered, sent out ripples of shock waves, as it were, upon the surface of the waters. This was before he said, Yehi or let there be light. The point is, even in the darkness, there's a witness, a whisper, a vibration of Elohim's statement, which would be truth, which would be the causal affecting of creation. So here, as it were, the letter He, we're going to talk in this first section about the orthography, or the design of the letter He, so that when you see a letter He, you'll recognize instantly what it is. So there's two voices to the letter He. When we talked previously to the letter Bet, we talked about an inner, like a mind, if this is like a tadpole shape, and then there's the exterior, the social, the personal and the social, the letter Bet being a duality. And so the letter He incorporates that duality. So what you have here is like this black jacket in the darkness, and something that looks like nature, like this camouflage sort of a shirt. That's the one voice of the He, which is the whisper, the quiet voice, the inner voice. It reminds me of the story where Elijah was running after he slaughtered the 500 priests of Baal, and Jezebel was after him. And he went and he ran all the way down to, perhaps it was down to Saudi Arabia, which would be Jabal al-Lawz, where Mount Sinai was, and he was hiding, and Elohim came to speak to him, and it says there was an earthquake and a fire and this great torrent of wind, it says, but in a storm, but it says, but the voice of Yahweh wasn't in that, and then there came this small whisper which said to Elijah, what are you doing? And so there's these two voices. One is, as it were, the little whisper, and then here's the other side of it, which is the, wearing the pertinent shirt for the week, is the screaming voice, which would have looked like what you would have thought the voice was in the storm, in the loud scream. So here the color that's on the chart for orange is orange for the letter He. So again, this is so that anybody who gets this visual association of whatever we happen to wear per week with the letter Hey! That's the loud voice. So we'll talk about the design of the letter He. We're going to start off with English here first. The fifth letter, we got Aleph, Bet, Gimel. Dalet was last week. This is He. The fifth letter in English is the letter E. And interestingly enough, the small letter E also looks like the backwards shape of the Hebrew Bet, which again is the shape of the idea of the floor plan of the tent, or the embryonic shape, the tadpole shape, the personal, the social aspect. As a tent, to just touch base this a little bit, if you have a tent, the floor plan shapes like this, you might say, you might have a roof over the tent. It says Abraham sat in the front of his tent during the day when it was hot outside and spoke to people. If you're sitting here in front of your tent, this is the social area, but around the corner in the private section is what they called my Father's house. So it's the personal place. And as we discussed in the Shema, where it says, you will think of these things and speak of these things. When you lie down, that's your personal space. And when you rise up, that's your social space. And when you write them on the doorposts of your house, that's personal. And on your gates, that's social. And you will think of them and you will teach them to your children. Again, it's this personal social. There's this inner and the outer aspect. So with the hey, it's also the quiet whisper and the loud shout. And I'm sorry to shout too loud there, but I'm trying to make a point that you will associate and just burn into your mind regarding this letter. So the letter E is the fifth letter in English, and the letter hey in the modern, what's called the Chaldean flame letter, is shaped like this. If people can see it. You could say, well, we're not really here to talk about the modern, we're going to talk about the paleo, but you look at that letter and say, well, what's going on with that? Well, this side is almost like in a shroud, like it's covered over, like somebody wearing a hood. Again, that's kind of this hidden voice. And this is open, where a mouth would be open, and so that's like this speaking. So that's like more of a dynamic voice. You also have some that study the modern letters say, well, here's the modern Dalet, and it's basically like a door frame. Here's the header, and the door would have the two sides. And we talked about how last week, if someone wanted to become a bondservant and wanted to become you might say, a lifelong servant for a master that he really preferred to stay with, even though he could be free, they'd put his ear to the door and drive a spike in it, a hole with an awl, and the blood would pour down and onto the threshold. And Mark last week was talking about the different covenants were made at the threshold and the doorway. And so you have this picture of the Dalet saying, okay, here's where a man, and so here's a vav. And a vav in the modern is basically just a straight line. It typically might have like a little flame on top, but it's a straight line. So people that know about the esoteric description of the modern letters see a man under the protection of this door. So the letter Hey is the fifth letter, the letter Dalet is the fourth letter, and the Vav is the sixth letter. So you could say the Hey finds its identity, in a sense, between these other two letters. So the Hey is the revelation, 5, the letter Hey means to reveal, essentially, how a man, Vav, 6, can be protected by the covenant that he made at the threshold of the door, or finding the covering of whose door he has access to. So here you have the three-way association, I'll write it in Paleo, between the Hey, the Dalet, and the Vav. So as we discussed a couple weeks ago, the letter here acts like it's a bridge between these other letters, and you can kind of see that in the modern letter Hey. There's also a kind of a short leg here and this longer leg here. Something else about this modern letter, if you see an advertisement, say about asthma, medicine, you'll see a person's head, neck, and shoulders, and then you'll see their mouth, and going down into their lungs, and then the rest of their body out here. And this almost is like the shape of the letter Hey. You've got the short leg here, like the jaw, and then you've got the other part here. And this is the respiratory tract. So this is actually like a respiratory tract, where this opening is the mouth, and this is the breathing in part. And if you drew the letters heavier, can you see that at all? Where the letter Hey is like a respiratory tract. So when you say the letter Hey, it's actually pronounced in Hebrew, Ha, which is pure breath. Ha. And it's pronounced, if you see the letter Hey written in a word, it's Ha. So if you say the name, it's Ha Shem. So again, the letter He, in Paleo, the letter He is speaking of breath. But the fact that it means the word the, it's pointing to something, it's designating something, but the letter, or the word the, isn't exactly its own identity, it's connecting other things. So the letter He really acts as a bit of a bridge between other matters. It finds its identity amongst the other matters. If you say the, you're expecting something. It's like ... the what? He, if you see the letter He as it used before a word, and here's where the dictionary comes in very helpful. Many words start with the letter He, and the letter He doesn't mean the. It's part of the spelling of the word. Not always, and you won't know that. If you're reading in the Tanakh and you see a word with the letter He, unless you become more familiar with the words, you don't know whether that He is simply a prefix meaning the, or whether it's actually part of a root word. If you look in the dictionary and you look under the He section, and you see all these words that are spelled with the letter He, you'll realize how many words actually are verbs starting with the letter He, and it doesn't mean the. And quite often, you'll find words that they overlap. You'll have a three-letter word that sounds like a verb root, and then you'll have another three-letter word, and they overlap. And so when you look at a translation, the way it's rendered in the whichever Bible, whichever scriptures you prefer, sometimes they'll pick this one, and sometimes they'll pick that one. You can say, well, how do I know which of the two it is? It could be either one. And so what I've been trying to do is look at both of these and say, how would you read the verse if this was the verb, and this was a suffix, you might say, or if this was the verb, and this was a prefix? And because there's no way to say for sure which one it is, it might be a verse which is actually read two different ways. And then you can do the same thing with sometimes there's three parts of the word. But the point is, if you look at the letter He and say, it's a respiratory tract, it's a breathing, like the Ruach Elohim that was breathing or fluttering or hovering or sending out vibrations, because Elohim spoke and caused everything to exist. But before he spoke Yehi Or, which means let there be light, which was the very next verse, this Ruach, and then you say, well, what's a Ruach? Well, Ruach is literally the word for wind, or path of the wind, or breath. So you could say it's the breath of Elohim was quivering, hovering, fluttering, sending out vibrations over the face of the waters. That sound, because sound is simply wavelengths, but so is light wavelengths. And wavelengths, typically drawn like this, could be sound or light, radio waves, different frequencies. So it was sending out frequencies before Yahweh ever spoke the words Yehi Or. He had already, as it were, set things up to respond by sending out these vibrations. So part of the reason why we're studying these things is to say if we can adapt our minds, our consciousness, our thoughts to the disposition of Yahweh's setting things up, hopefully we will be prepared to receive the word which causes effect, like Yehi Or. To condition ourselves. People were talking last week and earlier out here about the Rife machine, sending out frequencies of light and sound that actually do curing of physical ailments. Nothing mystical, it's simply physics. It's physical, it's cellular. There's more to wavelengths and sound and light, color, sound waves, speaking these words, these letters, this language has more effect than we have any idea because we haven't been taught. So the purpose of this class is to make these things which are completely foreign to become a little bit more familiar. And I believe that simply going over the alphabet, for example, singing the song. Someone asked if we could do that each week just to kind of prime our minds, so we'll do that in a moment. But I wanted to express one of the reasons. This is not just an intellectual exercise. This is conditioning our beings through the senses of vision and hearing to receive the dynamic command of the words like Yehi Or, and so then the will of Yahweh will be activated, you might say, within us. Let me address the paleoorthography first, and then we'll go through the song as a way to set up where we're at. So we're mentioning the two voices in the letter Hey, and as we discussed with the Aleph, this is the plan, and Bet being the house actually established the structure, the material form of everything that would follow. And in the material form was this binary dualism, which is in or out, with or not with, of the house, not of the house. So the Aleph made it, which was a chad, which was one, opened itself up to be an other, or to make an other, which could potentially be an enemy, an adversary, could cut and run and say, I'm out of here, but then it had the option of coming back. And so the Gimel established the relationship between mobility, the freedom to leave, but also the freedom to boomerang and come back to rejoin with the Aleph as a participant of the house. And then Dalet being the door, it's like, well, what's the door? Well, just going to the summary here of what we said last week, that it's not a matter of waiting for the door to open, waiting for the door to come, waiting for the Mashiach to come back, or waiting for him to, the Almighty, Hashem, to finally decide to do something. I presented at the end of last week that when we, who want to be his Bet, Gimel, return, boomerang, back to his revelation, his words, what he's already told us, and simply start doing what he said to do. That is the door. The door is we, his people, start doing out of our own preference, teshuvah, out of love, returning to the Torah, because we want to, because we can, because there's great benefit in it. And so not just because there was a commandment, or we're going to get in big trouble if we don't, or, gee, the law's been done away with, why should we subject ourselves to under the law again? Because there's great benefit and blessing, which hopefully we can get into what some of that is. But the point is, when we decide to come back to his declared, revealed ways, the door opens. That's the door. The door is us going back. We don't have to sit here and wait for the bus to show up. Do what he said to do. The bus, you might say, that takes us right back to where we're supposed to be, manifests as we start doing what he said to do, which is basically chesed, which is tender loving kindness, which is love one another. Love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, soul, strength, and moed, which are it's translated actually your substance, meod. But how do you love him? It says in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, John talked about it. Don't say you love Elohim if you burden, if you besiege, if you steal from, if you extort your neighbor. You can't say you love Elohim and you do all these horrible, inhuman things to your neighbor. Love your neighbor. That's the evidence that you love Elohim. That's the door. And all through the Tanakh, all through the Old Testament, every time Yahweh has a complaint about his people, it's that they're looking at other deities, but pretty much they're tearing each other apart. This is the key thing. So here you have these two voices, and here's the Paleo Hay. If you picture a window, typically some windows have the top solid and the bottom open. So this will slide up and light beams through, whereas this might be a fixed piece of glass. So here, this side, here's like a window frame. This side of the piece of glass, there's nothing there. It's like a solid piece of glass. This is the whisper side, the closed side, and here is the screaming side. The hey, the dynamic, the bold. So you've got two voices in the hey. One is passive, and the other one's dynamic. One of them is like the whisper, and the other one's like the shout. One of them you almost have to infer, and the other one is quite clear and blatant. If you were to see a cloud with beams of sunshine shining through it, when the atmospheric conditions are just right, that's a picture of the hay. You see these light waves shining out from behind the cloud. If you have a megaphone, if you were to draw a cartoon of a megaphone and it's shouting and you have these lines coming out of it, blaring, that's a picture of the hay. The hay can be sound and it also can be light. So the interesting comparison to these, and the Mishkan pattern, the day of Yom Teruah, which is the first festival on the 7th month, the first day of the 7th month. And the Mishkan pattern, you'll see on the chart out there, it lines up with the menorah symbol, but yet is trumpets, but the menorah is light. And it's the day 4 that he put the sun and the moon and the stars and the Mazarot, which is the constellations of the stars, he put those in the sky on day 4, which lines up with the same position. In the Psalms, I believe it is, it talks about the stars singing. Well, the stars are lights, but the stars are actually sending out, the more we know about, I think it's called radio astronomy, it's putting out these frequencies of sound. So even though we look at the stars and say, well, that's light, no, they're emanating vibrations, and what we can see is the visual spectrum, but the vibrations they're putting out is all different kinds of frequencies that are both sound and light. So the point about hay is it's sound and light, it's a loud voice and a whisper, and it's Yahweh's preference to speak with these two witnesses his message to his people, which is his people is not just, well, his people is Israel, or it's the Jews, or it's the church of the Christians, or his people is anyone who wants to come back and be in his house. Having made individual people with the right to choose, Dalit being, remember, being a door, being like a choice, anyone who chooses to be in the Creator's house, he has declared, Haid, that they have the right to boomerang, to come back to his house. That's the message. There's more to it than that, which we'll get into in these other segments here coming up. But to see the connection, and the Paleo letter Samic looks basically like a menorah. It's this here. And again, if you look at a picture of the Vav, modern Vav, with two expressions, or two witnesses, or two people as a testimony of who he is, you could draw this with a hay coming out this side and a hay coming out that side, which is almost a picture of being winged. So the Vav man, this gets into some of the things we're going to talk about later, but Yeshua being the Vav man, the sent one, the Gimel to the Dalit, Haid as the Vav. From the heavenly realm, He gimmeled, he is sent as the voyager, the Aleph Tav going voyaging, gimmeling to the Dalet, the earth. But he's also Hayed, revealed, as the door. Yeshua said, I am the door. No one enters the Father except through me. So he's Hayed as the door. He calls himself the door, but he also makes clear the door. And if you think of the Dalet as the earth, he's coming to the Dalet. So when you look at these letters, there's all these different things. The earth, the door, the decision, the choice, the right to enter. The Hay basically is pointing at that. So whenever you see a Hay in the Scriptures, it's trying to illuminate something about, you might say, our choice to return to Yahweh. Now you could say, well, wait a minute, there's Hays in all kinds of verbs, all kinds of words. There's many words. Look at the dictionary, it's huge. How can I say that every time there's a Hay, it means it's revealing something about the message that we can return to Yahweh? How can I say such a thing? Out of all the different words and all the different meanings. It's because fundamentally, if you know what the alphabet means, every letter speaks about the message of the whole alphabet, which is all about his people returning to him, and therefore, any word you spell with any of those letters, basically it's the same message. It's called a hologram, which we'll get into the definition of that later on. But that's how I can say that every time you see the Hay, you go, he's trying to tell me that I can return to him. I can return to the place where we once belonged, though we didn't even know it. We can return to the Creator's heart. The Dalet, through Chesed, is the message of the Hay. We have a break. This is really serious stuff. And I would like to, I've mentioned this before, I'll mention it again. In Jeremiah 31, verse 31, where typically people reference the Old Testament words regarding the New Testament or the New Covenant, what it says is, no longer will any man, this is when the days of the New Covenant happen, where Yahweh says, I will write a new covenant on their heart, not like the old covenant that I made, which covenant they broke. But he says, no longer will any man need to teach his brother, saying, you should know Yahweh, for they will all know me, from the least of these until the greatest. That's the way it's translated. But if you look at the words there that it uses, they will all know me, and I'll write this up on the board. The word me is spelled Aleph, Vav, Tav, Yod. And this word here is the word ot, where we get the word oath, which is a sign or a symbol or something that you've sworn to, and it's the sign that you've sworn to it. And Yod at the end basically means my, so it's my oath. But the word Aleph, Vav, Tav, and you won't see this in Strong's Concordance, but you will see it in the Red Dictionary. But I've also, just for what it's worth, I've found things in Strong's that are not in the Red Dictionary. So you kind of have to use them both together, but I found the Red Dictionary to be way more valuable to me than Strong's, but I do use them both. But the word Aleph, Vav, Tav literally means a letter of the alphabet. So this is where you can infer that if my oath is also my letter of the alphabet, then each letter of the alphabet is a sign or a symbol or a token or a little, what you might call a grammaton, which is it's a Greek word where we get the word grammar, or like gramophone. It's something that you write or draw, is where we get the word like graphic. It's the same thing. So an oath is something that you write or draw, which is a symbol of your oath. And in the dictionary, you can see that every letter of the alphabet is a symbol, a graphic rendering of Yahweh's oath. And it says they will all know me. This is the word oti. They will all know my oath. And when it says from the least of these, I question the translation, because the word least of these is the root of the word is spelled kuf tet, which is where we get the word cute. And cute literally it means some small little thing that's kind of cute. Like we're going to sing a cute little song to the tune of Itsy Bitsy Spider. But then it says from the least of these two, it can mean increasing or being regarded as gidolim, which is great, incredible things. What we're seeing here is that these cute little letters sung to the tune of Itsy Bitsy Spider are actually the sworn oath of the creator of the universe, who has revealed himself and his covenant to his people, which he is legally bound by to give them the blessing or the curse, all dependent on their personal behavior, their heart, to either do his ways or not do his ways, their choice. And this song is actually trying to clarify that. In the book of Deuteronomy, he told, I believe it was Moses, he said, take 2 stones, put white plaster on them, and write all the words of this Torah well clarified. The word is bar hayatov, and it literally means to make something clear and evident, not confusing. This is, you might say, the loud voice. Make these words well clarified. He told Moshe as a commandment. This song is our attempt to do that commandment. We are trying to make very clear, like this neon jacket, the words of this Torah so that we can do it. As a comparison, which we'll get to in a few minutes after we do the song, the passive voice, for example, is like looking at these flowers. Or the camouflage shirt under this, which is to say, there's parables and mysteries in nature, which are the passive whispering voice that you have to have some insight to know how to read. Before we knew that these letters meant anything, they were just letters. They're little things you spell words with. You write them on blocks and children play with them. Cute little things. But when you know what they are, it's where you can read the mysteries that are the whispers, and they become the shout, they become this dynamic, like, this is really serious business. So just bear that in mind as we sing the song. We're doing 2 things. We're fulfilling Jeremiah 31:31 concerning the new covenant, or the renewed, Brit Chadashah, to be renewed like the moon is renewed each month, where the cute little things are becoming great, incredible things, and we're also well clarifying the words of the Torah, which Moshe was told to do. So let's go ahead and sing the song. We'll just sing it one time through, assuming everybody remembers from the other week. Here we go. Aleph is the plan that Abba purposed in his heart. Bet is the container of all he would impart. Gimel is the sent one to retrieve us home again, to enter through the door. The Dalet, hey, look, he's the Vav, man. Cut off, perfect yet, the Zion one of 7-ness, Selah. You can stop and think about it. Suspension in the music. Het is for our safekeeping, sealed by Tet like a wedding ring. Yod, his hand who formed my hand, to hold on to his Kaf, which is Torah, Torah, Torah. Our regard reveals the heart. Lameding, so that from Mem a blessed noon restart. Samech, Ayin, Pei, Shema, Shomer, together one. Zadi stands alone, though all Israel shall become. After Kuf, our noble Resh, exalted in the sky. Shin, our shining Elioni, Yahweh El Shaddai. The Aleph, Tavd, accomplished and completed as he said. the one word left untranslated, the one we all reject. Still the offer yet remains, Chaim et ha'olam. For the simple Brit of love and death is Aleph Bet, his song, Ha-shir shirim. So going back to the passive voice, there's something about the letter Hey compared to the letter Vav. Hey as a prefix can mean the, which points to, so it can be either the whisper or the shout. But Hey is a suffix, so if you have a word here, for example, Pei, Tav, Chet, Hey. Pei, Tav, Chet, if you look in the dictionary, it's an opening, it's an entrance, it's a gateway. As we discussed last week, a dalet is a door, which is a gateway. The word bet, as in chababi, is also like the inner place, but it also, you'll see that it means a gateway. And I believe the word shin ayin resh is a gateway. But this word gateway here is one which, if you look at it as the gateway to the Mishkan, there's this four-colored door, one door in. And you could say, well, the Pei is a mouth, that speaks of words. Tav is a sign of the covenant. Het is like the Mishkan wall, and this Hey is something revealing. If you look in the dictionary under this word here, it has to do with opening. Not just a gateway, but the fact that it opens. It also, you'll see that it has to do with furrows, which is where you cut open the earth to open it up, like in a valley. It also has to do, if you put a mem in front of this word, it literally is the word for key, K-E-Y, which is that which opens. So the mem can mean away from, or it can mean the place of, but in this case it means that thing which you use to cause this to happen. When you put a Hey at the end, it's something which has been opened. For example, if you draw out a sword, you've now uncovered the sword. So there's this picture that we have in the back, we'll talk about it another week, which is the emblem I have in the back of my jacket, which has to do with this sword and the imagery that John saw in the first 5 chapters of the book of Revelation. Yeshua has a sword coming out of his mouth, and the symbol down at the bottom is the Aleph, Mem, and Tav, which is the word truth. And so part of the imagery on that picture is this sword rightly dividing the word of truth. If you look at this word in the dictionary and break apart the letters, you'll see that the key being given to Israel to break open the sealed words in order to rightly divide the word of truth and get away from the bad theology, the bad doctrines, the bad translations, all goes back to understanding what he spoke concerning the covenant and what the Mishkan reveals, which is the root of this matter, discussing the Mishkan pattern as the basis of determining what this Aleph Bet means, which is key to the 7 days, the 7 festivals, and the articles of the Mishkan. What I'm trying to show you is that if you look at the dictionary and you break down to try to dissect a word here, you can see that what we're doing is almost like it's prophesied and embedded in the language itself, that there would come a day that we would do this, when the curse that Yahweh put on his people, where he said in Leviticus 26, if you don't keep my covenant and you don't want my ways and you don't return to me, to Shuva, boomerang back, I'm going to take it away. I'm going to take my words out of your mouth. I'm going to take my name out of your mouth. You're not going to be able to call on me. Because when I called, he whispered, he shouted, and we plugged our ears. When he begged us to listen to him, he says, I'm going to plug my ears when you scream. And then there's a whole list of the torments that would come upon his people in Deuteronomy, starting with chapter 28, which Jamie just mentioned. I would encourage everybody here and everybody on camera that's listening to this, pick up your Bible and start reading Deuteronomy 28 and read through at least chapter 32, because Deuteronomy chapter 32 is the Song of Moses. Now, I don't know what tune they put to it, but it's a scary song. We'll get to it in a few minutes. But the point is, the hay at the end of the word, we're talking about the hay. The hay at the end of the word refers to that which is opened. And when you have a hay at the end of the word, it's what's known as being in the feminine form, as compared to a word that ends with the letter vav. If you have other letters here and it ends in the letter vav, it's in the masculine form, which we'll get to next week because that's a vav. But it's kind of like in Spanish, where you have some word ending in an O versus an ending in an A. If it ends in the O, it's in the masculine form. It ends in the letter A, it's in the feminine form. In Hebrew, if the hay is at the end, it has to do with the feminine form, which means something is opened or something is revealed. There's a lot more to what that means, and if you look at the different words, if you just start reading through Scripture and you find a word that ends in a hay, it has to do with revealing something, and if it starts with a hay, it has to do with telling you that something is being revealed. There's a difference there. And if you start reading the Scripture written in Hebrew, a lot of this stuff has to be found by use. You have to do the work. Now, if you don't have a Hebrew Tanakh and you have the dictionary, just start reading words. If you find a verb root, you'll notice that just start at the beginning. Open up anywhere. Read anywhere. See what happens every time you add a letter or take one letter away and put another letter in its place. Look what the difference is between the root of a word spelled with either 2 or 3 letters and then that same verb form with the letter hay at the end. Notice the difference. That's what I've done. I've gone through this dictionary thousands and thousands of times, literally. And you have to do it. You have to train your eyes to become familiar with, in the Tanakh, the Hebrew version of the Scriptures, and in the dictionary. You just start noticing patterns. And you'll notice what happens when a hay is at the beginning and a hay is at the end. Yeshua said, "He who has eyes to see, he who has ears to hear," that's the whisper. Again, like the camouflage shirt. The silent voice. Like I mentioned, looking at the flowers. What message is there in there? What message is in creation? What song are those stars singing? Can we hear them? Do we know? It says, all the heavens declare the glory of Elohim, their creator. How are they declaring his glory? Think. You have to ponder that. You have to read scriptures. You have to put these things together. That's the inner place of the bet, right? So here you have the bet. And there's that inner. That's the cerebral part. That's thinking, pondering, meditating. When you look at the obvious, where you see the words, the exterior, the social, those, write these words on the stones that have been coated in white plaster and make them well clarified. You've got the pondering, you've got the reading. Hay is that he's given us both these voices. And so when you have, like I showed earlier, the vav with the 2 hays, he's given us double witness. Moshe said to the people of Israel, "I call heaven and earth as your witnesses. I'm proclaiming these words that you, Israel, you had better regard them." If you read Deuteronomy 28, you will see why we should regard them. What he starts off saying is the blessing. And there's only a few verses, but here's the interesting thing about the whisper of the hay of the blessing. It looks passive, like a flower sitting there. It's like, what's the message in the flower? What's the big deal? If you read Deuteronomy 28, he says such things as, "I will send the rain in its season." Your crops will bear fruit. Your children will be healthy. You'll have a sane mind, and I will not put on you any of the diseases and afflictions that I put on your tormentors, the Egyptians. Well, that's a pretty passive. That looks like natural. That looks like nature. But the camouflaged message is that it looks like nature, but it's not. It's Yahweh's specific hand influencing nature for his people's benefit so that they can have a peaceful life. Now you want the screaming version? You read the later part of Deuteronomy 28 into Deuteronomy 29, and he talks about adversaries are going to do to Israel. We'll deal with that later. So here's the thing. Go to the verse, or the verses that are in Judges chapter 2. If you read the whole chapter, I won't take time to read the whole thing, but basically, it might be worth reading. I'll jump around a little bit. This is really critical. This says basically the same thing he said in Deuteronomy 28 to 30. An emissary, a messenger, a malach, like an angel, like a prophet, of Yahweh went up from the Gilgal to Bochim. Now the word Gilgal, remember we talked last week, a gimel and a lamed, it's like a boomerang, it's like that which rolls, and Bochim happens to mean crying. And he said, this is what Yahweh told the messenger, the malach, the prophet, to say to Israel. So this is what we're saying here, because this is a hey. He said, I brought you up from Egypt, and I brought you to the land that I swore to your forefathers, and I said, I shall never annul my covenant with you. That is Yahweh's sworn oath. Anybody that says the covenant's been done away with is now in contradiction to this verse in Judges chapter 2, and now we have to decide who to listen to. The voice of Yahweh, who swore that he'd never annul the covenant, or to somebody else who says that they think the scripture should be interpreted that it's been annulled. That's another matter. But you shall not seal a covenant with the inhabitants of this land. No treaties with the infidels, you might say. You shall break apart their altars, but you, Israel, did not hearken to my voice. That word hearken is shomer and shema, to hear, believe, and do, the watch, keep, and guard. What is this that you have done? So also, and there's that word gimel mem. We talked last 2 weeks ago about the gimel mem being a heap, a pile, boomeranged back. The boomerang of what you guys have done, Israel, our forefathers, I said, I shall not chase them out before you, and they will be unto you as thorns in your sides, and their deities will be a trap for you. So the people of Israel raised their voices and wept, and named that place Bochim, which means crying, and there they brought offerings to Yahweh. The people served Yahweh all the days of Yeshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Yahoshua. There's a different spelling of the word, and you could say, well, did Joshua have two different ways to spell his name? It's Yod-He-Vav Shin Ayin, or it's Yod-He Vav Shin Vav Ayin, and the difference is the word Yeshua and Yehoshua literally means Yahweh's save, help, redeeming. Saving, helping, redeeming. So you can say that the way to read that is that, well, they outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work Yahweh, which he had done for Israel. Or you could say they outlived seeing the manifestation of the good help, the deliverance, and the redemption that Yahweh gave his people when they cried out to him. So, and this is why we have this class right now. Verse 10, a new generation arose after them that did not know Yahweh, nor the deeds that he had performed for Israel. And the children of Israel would do what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh and would worship the Baalim. They would forsake Yahweh, the Elohim of their forefathers, who took them out of the land of Egypt, and follow the deities of others. That word deities of others is Elohim Achrim. There's a whole study in that. I doubt if we can get to that. But Yahweh has used that phrase, Elohim Achrim, translated the deities of others, the Elohim of others, numerous times, many times. That's his greatest complaint against his people when it comes to referencing other deities. That's a whole study on what that really means. We'll have to deal with that later. From among the deities of the peoples that were around them, they would prostrate themselves to them and anger Yahweh. They would forsake Yahweh and worship the Baal and the Asherah. Then the wrath of Yahweh would flare against Israel, and he would deliver them into the hands of plunderers, and they would plunder them. And he would deliver them into the hands of their enemies all around, so they could no longer stand before their enemies. Whenever they would go out in battle, the hand of Yahweh would be upon Israel for evil, as Yahweh had spoken and as Yahweh had sworn to them, and they would be very distressed. Verse 16, then Yahweh would set up judges. There's the word that he would set up is the word gimel mem, a boomerang back again, judges. So Yahweh, he would send the adversaries of their neighbors as enemies to plunder and afflict and besiege and pillage them and murder them and steal all the stuff that Yahweh had given them. They'd send up a cry, and then as a boomerang of their cry, gimel mem, the same word again, Yahweh would send the word for judges, but the word judge has to do with right rulings. These people would say, start doing what he said is the right way to treat each other. Again, the Dalet. What's the door to be redeemed? Start doing what he said to do, the way we treat each other, and stop looking at the neighbor's deities and thinking that we should regard them, the ancient people that lived in this land or any other land. Gee, we dig up artifacts and, hey, what did those guys used to do? What did the Mayans and the Aztecs and the Incas and the American Indians and the ancient Chinese and the ancient Canaanites and the Egyptians and Babylonians? Hey, let's do some of their stuff. He said, no, do not, because if you do, you have stepped outside, and every one of those deities, you essentially strengthen and empower their hand to come down on you and crush you. That's the warning. That's the hay. What he says, but they would not hearken to the judges either, for they would stray after Elohim Achrim and prostrate themselves to them. They would turn away quickly from the path their forefathers had traveled to hearken to the commandments of Yahweh. They did not do so. When Yahweh would set up judges for them, Yahweh would be with the judge, and he would save them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For Yahweh would have relented because of their outcry before those who oppressed them and crushed them. Let Yahweh hear your hay screaming to him if you want us to be relieved from the burden of these oppressions of financially, militarily, governmentally, bodily afflictions. Financially, scream to Yahweh. Let him hear your hay. So the wrath of Yahweh, verse 20, would flare against Israel, and he would say, because, here's the boomerang, because this nation has violated my covenant that I commanded their forefathers, and they did not hearken to my voice, I too shall no longer drive away any man from before them, from among all the nations that Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel through them. Interestingly enough, that word test is spelled nun somic. Now, the symbol that we have on the Eriktology charts is a nun somic. It happens to mean the living one on a support structure. It has a picture of Yeshua being raised up on the stake. It's a picture of the serpent being lifted up, and all those who were bitten of the vipers looked at it and were healed. It also means to experiment on, to test. It has to do, it's the word for banner, and it has to do whenever Yahweh would raise up, and Moshe said, raise up and let your enemies be scattered. These things work both ways, the blessing and the curse, the two voices. You raise up the nun somic, and the enemies were scattered, but if you don't do what these words of Yahweh says to do, the nun somic is, he won't chase away the enemies, and they will pillage and plunder and afflict his people until they cry out. And he says, if you want me to help you, turn back to what I said to do, which primarily is disregard the foreign deities and treat one another with justice and kindness, which is righteousness. That's the hay, that's the message, that's the dalet, that's the door, that's what we gimel boomerang back to get into being Yahweh's bet, which was the Aleph plan all along. In order to test Nun Samach Israel through them, are they observing the Aleph Tav Derek, which is the path, Derek is the word Dalet Resh Kaf, to follow them as their forefathers observed or not? So here's the thing. He sends trouble disguised as a man. The men of the Canaanite and surrounding neighbors. Trouble, when Israel does not observe the covenant, comes in the form of a man. Should it be anyone's surprise that help also comes in the form of a man? The word help is Sheen Ayin. Yod-He's man or bridge of Sheen Ayin, Yod-He Vav Sheen Ayin, means Yahweh's help, salvation, deliverance, redemption is Yod-He Vav Sheen Ayin, which is Yeshua. Anybody who thinks that Yahweh wouldn't have sent Yeshua and that he was just some guy that ought to have been put to death, that was a spectacle when he was ripped open like the Pei Tav Het, opening up his back with the Roman whips. He was a hay of Yahweh's salvation. And for anyone to think that even though that the screaming to get our attention would come in the form of our adversaries and our neighbors, and that Yahweh wouldn't have that also be a man, notice the parallels, notice the form, notice the secret whisper in what did he design in nature? What's going on here? Yeshua said, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. He has eyes to see, let him see. Notice not just the blatant words, but the underpinnings of the systems that he put into place. I'm going to read one more thing because we have a couple minutes left before the break. If you look at the words of the names of the adversaries that he mentions there in the book of Judges, 2nd chapter, he mentions Mitzrayim, the Amri, the Ammon, Beni Ammon, the Philistines, the Sidon, these are all written in Paleo, I'm trying to phonetically put them together, the Amalekites, and the Ma'on. You can say, okay, those are just a bunch of Canaanite names. Let me tell you what these words mean, because each name of one of these peoples represents the kind of trouble Yahweh allowed to come upon his people because they worshiped those people's deities, because they didn't pay attention to the hey of Yahweh, either the loud scream or the whisper, the still small voice in their heart, but they said, whatever. It's probably done away with. We can't regard it, too hard. He didn't really mean that. And he says, it was not for nothing that I told you this. This is what these names mean. Mitzrayim, bound, confined, limit. I'm just going to read these words kind of fast because we've got 3 minutes. Strait, distress, boundary, like a rock in a hard place, adjacent neighbor, abutment, czar, delivered up. Something was invented to strife and contention. It's like somebody says, I'm going to cause you trouble all of a sudden. Why? Just because? That's what Mitzrayim means. I just decided to go cause you trouble. It's like, I didn't do anything. I didn't say you did. I've just chosen to cause you trouble now. And now you've got this enemy on your back. The Amri literally means those who lord it over you, causing you to pledge allegiance. The word liege means one who you're indebted to. Pledge allegiance to them for protection. It's extortion. It also means bitter, cruel intimidation. The next word, the Ben Ammon, means dark, dim, weak, unclear, opaque, disregarding, quenched, obtuse, frustrated. It has to do with money, the system. The next word, the Philistines, means posterior, buttocks, foundation, basis, to secrete what you evacuate, to drink, invaders, difficult, many swarm of vermin. The Philistines, the word Philistines in Hebrew literally means a swarm of dirty, putrid vermin. The word for Zidon, judge, to stay, continuous, sentenced, doomed, lord and master, muffle, handcuffed, fisticuffs of aggression. These guys are just going to come and start fights and shackle you and hold you down every time you try to just live. Remember, Yahweh said he'd do away with these guys and chase them all away and send the hornet swarm after them if we regarded his words. And if he doesn't, he says, that's it, I'm not going to chase them away. We do it to ourselves, depending on how we regard Yahweh's words. The next word, the Amalekites. to feed with provisions a menu of hunting game supplied, enticed by flattery or deception, captured by the offer of provisions. Kind of sounds like creditors and banks and the government saying, come to us and we'll give you what you need. And Yahweh says, you don't go to anybody else, you go to me. I'll give you what you need. We go, yeah, but I can see what these guys are offering. And Yahweh says, I'm telling you, it's my word. They go, yeah, but I can see these guys' provision. I hope to never go to another creditor, I'll tell you. The next word, the Amalekites here, is to nip the neck off a bird, stricken, smitten, to be eclipsed, flogged, lashes, diseased, afflicted, blemished, cruel slavery, hard labor, toil, work, trouble, mischief, physical exercise like kneading dough. Then they feel like you're just working and working and working and working and working, and what's it all for? That's part of the curse. The next word, trouble, suffering, fates of conflict, like a soothsayer at your place of residence, domestic affliction, torture, fasting, has to do to like addressing a letter right to somebody's place. It's like, this one's got your name on it. It's like, gosh. Yahweh said to our forefathers he'd get rid of all these guys. And he says, I'm no longer going to chase them away. As we discussed, we believe that the end of the 2,730-year curse, if this is an accurate consideration, means that that sentence of Yahweh saying, okay, I'm not going to help you, is over, because he said in Leviticus 26, he multiply the curse 7 times, and then we can come back. I think where we're at is that we can ask them to get these guys off our back, but we must regard what he said, the hay, which we'll get to after the next break.